The stars drifted like frozen lights around the massive ship Valor. It was one of the proud flagships of the human fleet, a vessel known for its strength and reliability. But today that pride was hanging by a thin thread. The ship had been hit by a meteor storm 2 days ago, and since then its main drive had gone dead. Without it, the Valor was nothing more than a floating shell drifting through silent space. Inside the ship, tension filled every corridor. Crew members ran from one section to another, carrying tools, data tablets, and cables. Sparks sometimes flew from open panels as engineers tried one repair method after another. The air smelled like burnt metal and stress. Voices overlapped, commands echoed, and no one seemed to have an answer. At the center of all the noise stood General Arvin, the commanding officer. He was known for his strict attitude and sharp tongue. His uniform was spotless, his voice steady, but even he was beginning to show signs of frustration. The ship's core had been offline for 36 hours, and if it wasn't fixed soon, they would lose power to life support. Arvin turned toward the group of engineers standing in front of the control console. "You are the best the fleet has," he said in a low, serious voice. "And yet my ship is still dead in space. Someone tell me why." No one spoke for a moment. The head engineer, a tired man named Darren, cleared his throat. "Sir, the core is burned out beyond normal repair. We have replaced the plasma injectors, rewired the fusion lines, and reset the power modules, but the engine refuses to respond." The general's eyes narrowed. "So you are telling me that the finest warship in human history is beaten by a power failure?" Darren hesitated. "We are trying every solution, sir." Arvin sighed heavily. "Trying is not enough. I need results." In the back of the engineering bay stood a line of new recruits. They had been called in to assist, though most of them were fresh from the academy. Among them was Toma, a young technician from the mining colony of Dakara. He was quiet, short, and carried a small toolkit that looked worn but well kept. Unlike the others who whispered nervously or stared at the ground, Toma kept his eyes fixed on the massive drive core in the center of the room. The engine stood like a giant heart of steel and light. Silent now, its surface darkened with scorch marks. To Toma, it looked less like a machine and more like a wounded creature. He wanted to step forward to see it up close, but he knew his place. No one expected much from a recruit, especially one from a far mining world. The general paced near the console. "We have 1 day before the air recyclers start failing. I want that engine running before then. If someone can fix it, I'll marry them myself." The words were said with a bitter laugh. A few officers chuckled quietly. It was the kind of joke that carried both pressure and disbelief. Toma looked up. For a moment he met the general's eyes. Then he looked back at the engine. The challenge burned in his mind. It wasn't the promise of reward that caught his attention, but the problem itself. Machines had always spoken to him in ways people did not. Every sound, every vibration told a story. He waited until the meeting ended and the others went back to work. Then he slowly walked closer to the drive. The head engineer saw him and frowned. "Recruit, this is not a training simulator. Stay clear." Toma nodded but stayed near. He looked through the transparent panel that showed the energy conduits. "Sir," he said quietly, "may I see the calibration logs?" Darren blinked in surprise. "What for?" "You are a recruit. You wouldn't understand these readings." "Please, sir," Toma said calmly. "I just want to check something." The head engineer sighed but allowed it. "Fine, but don't touch anything." Toma opened the data pad and began scrolling through the calibration records. His eyes moved fast. He wasn't reading every number but looking for patterns. The plasma flow looked uneven, and the resonance frequency was slightly off by a fraction. That kind of shift could make the main regulator shut down automatically. He stepped closer to the engine's side panels. When the storm hit, he asked, "Did anyone check the resonance chamber?" Darren looked puzzled. "The resonance chamber is buried under the second housing layer. It was sealed after the last upgrade. No one has opened it in years." Toma nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's where the fault is." The older engineer looked at him with disbelief. "You think a sealed chamber is the problem?" Toma spoke softly. "Sometimes the oldest parts fail first, sir." The general, who had been watching from a distance, walked over. "And you are?" "Toma, sir. Technician trainee." "From which fleet school?" "Not from a fleet school, sir," Toma said honestly. "From Dakara mining colony." That made several officers raise their eyebrows. The general crossed his arms. So you think a mining recruit knows more than the fleet's top engineers? Thomas shook his head. No, sir. I just think machines talk the same language everywhere. The general stared at him for a long second, then gave a short laugh. Fine, you want to see the chamber? Go ahead. If you can find a way to fix this ship, maybe I will keep my promise. The room went silent. The other engineers looked at each other. The general's tone was half challenge, half mockery. But Toma only nodded, picked up his toolkit, and approached the sealed hatch near the engine base. The hatch hadn't been opened in years. Dust covered the corners and the bolts were stuck tight. Toma worked patiently, loosening one after another. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the air. Sweat rolled down his forehead, but he didn't stop. Inside the panel, wires ran like veins glowing faint blue from stored energy. The regulator chamber was visible through a thin gap, and Toma's eyes caught something strange, a faint scorch mark near one of the stabilizer rings. Sir, he called to the head engineer, the resonance regulator is burned. That's why the plasma field keeps collapsing. The head engineer frowned and leaned in. That's impossible. Those rings are supposed to withstand 10 times the current load, unless the grounding coil was damaged when the meteor hit. Toma said. Darren blinked. He opened the diagnostic panel and ran a quick test. The readings confirmed it. The grounding coil was unstable. For a second, even the general looked surprised. How did you know that? Arvin asked. Toma replied, On my colony, our mining engines use the same field regulators. When they break, the vibration shifts in the same pattern. I heard it when the backup systems powered up. The general raised an eyebrow. You heard it? Yes, sir. The hum was uneven, like a song out of tune. The general stared at him again, then let out a short, low whistle. Well, Toma from Dakara, since you seem to know what you're doing, fix it. The head engineer hesitated. Sir, he's only a recruit. The repair could damage the entire system if it fails. Arvin waved his hand. Then it fails. Nothing else has worked. Let him try. The room cleared slightly as the crew gave Toma space. He knelt beside the open hatch and took out a small multi-tool. The damaged coil was buried deep within the chamber, almost unreachable. He studied it carefully, then began dismantling the stabilizer assembly piece by piece. Every movement was steady and sure. He had done this kind of work many times before, though never on something this large. The hum of the emergency lights was the only sound for a while. The general stood silently, watching the young recruit's focus. No trace of arrogance or fear showed on Toma's face. He looked like someone who understood the heartbeat of the ship. Hours passed. Toma cleaned the burned contacts, replaced a few connectors with spares from unused drone circuits, and tightened every bolt by hand. The other engineers whispered quietly, impressed despite themselves. When he finished, he sealed the hatch and wiped his hands on his sleeve. It's ready to test, sir, he said. The head engineer took a deep breath and nodded to his crew. Power to core line 1. Begin ignition sequence. The sound of energy building filled the bay. A faint vibration spread through the floor. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Then, with a soft surge, the auxiliary lights brightened. The monitor showed stable energy flow returning to several systems. It's working, Darren whispered in disbelief. The field is stable. The general smiled slightly but didn't speak. The engine wasn't fully online yet, but it was the first sign of life in 2 days. The repair had stopped the power drain that threatened the core. Toma stepped back, tired but calm. The regulator will need a full rebuild later, he said. But now the system can breathe again. Arvin nodded slowly. You may have just bought us time, recruit. For the first time since the failure, there was hope in the room. The crew looked at Toma differently now. He wasn't just another recruit. He was the one who had seen what no one else noticed. He didn't boast or smile. He simply packed his tools and stood aside, letting the engineers continue their work. As he walked toward the corridor, he glanced back once at the great engine. The soft vibration of power returning made him smile faintly. Machines always told the truth if you listened closely enough. Behind him, the general watched in silence. There was something about that young man's calm that stirred a strange respect in him. Maybe the joke he made earlier would not seem so funny anymore. The stars outside shone a little brighter as Valor's systems came slowly back to life. The ship still had a long way to go before it could move again, but for the first time in days, its heart had begun to beat once more. The next morning began with a pale glow spreading across the corridors of the Valor. The ship was still not moving, but power had returned to most systems. The air was fresh again, the lights no longer flickered, and the hum of auxiliary power filled the halls. It was a small victory, yet it lifted the spirit of everyone on board. In the engineering deck, people were working non-stop. Panels were open, tools scattered, and voices mixed in a steady rhythm of work. Toma entered quietly, carrying his old toolkit as always. Some of the engineers glanced at him with curiosity. Yesterday, no one knew his name. Now, even the senior staff whispered about the recruit who had fixed what they could not. Head engineer Duran stood near the main drive control, scanning new diagnostic data. When he saw Toma, he gave a slight nod. Good timing. We need your eyes again. Toma walked over. What happened now, sir? The power is stable, but the main core still refuses to ignite. The resonance chamber is clean, but the plasma injectors are not firing in sequence. It makes no sense. Duran rubbed his forehead. We have tried recalibration 5 times. Toma studied the readings. May I check the injectors directly? Darren sighed. If you must. At this point, any idea is worth trying. The injectors were long metal tubes that glowed faint blue inside. They were supposed to feed energy evenly into the core, but on the monitor, one of them showed delayed pulses. That delay was small, but enough to keep the engine from stabilizing. Toma crouched beside the open casing and listened carefully. His ears caught a faint ticking sound that didn't match the others. This one is out of sync, he said. It's firing half a second late. That's impossible, Duran replied. We checked the timing sensors. Toma tapped the side of the injector. It's not the sensor. It's the power line connection. It has a microfracture. The energy is leaking. He took a small magnifier from his kit and scanned the thin line. A spark flickered from a hairline crack. There it is. Darren looked amazed. How did you notice that? I listened, Toma said with a small smile. It sounded tired. The head engineer let out a quiet laugh. You talk about machines like they are people. Sometimes they act like people, Toma said softly. They get weak when ignored. He replaced the damaged section using spare wiring and sealed it with a stabilizer clamp. The injector pulse shifted to perfect rhythm. The monitor's red warning changed to green. It was a small fix, but it made the system balance again. The general entered just as Darren finished running a test. His boots echoed against the metal floor, and his presence drew every eye in the room. He looked at the screen, then at Darren. Progress. We have stable flow again, sir, Darren replied. Still no ignition, but the system is holding. Arvin nodded slowly, then looked toward Toma. And what about you, recruit? Are you the reason my ship is breathing again? Toma straightened. Only doing what I can, sir. The general studied him with a half smile. You seem to do more than most. He stepped closer to the engine and rested his gloved hand against the metal surface. So, Toma from Dakara, tell me what you think is wrong with my ship now. Toma hesitated. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. The engine is not the only problem, Toma said. The design of the resonance network is too narrow. It doesn't allow for stress release during overload. When the meteor storm hit, the pressure waves folded back into the regulators. That caused the burnout. Duran frowned. Are you saying the fleet engineers built it wrong? Toma shook his head. Not wrong. Just perfect on paper, but space doesn't care about perfect numbers. The general raised an eyebrow. So what do you suggest? Manual recalibration, Toma answered. Using harmonic tuning, Arvin folded his arms. Explain that, Toma took a deep breath. When machines lose balance, their sound changes. Every engine has a natural hum like a heartbeat. If we can align the frequency of the plasma flow with the natural vibration of the core, it will ignite without overload. It is risky but possible. The engineers exchanged uncertain glances. Darren said, that method is old. It was used in pre-colony mining engines, not in modern fleet ships. I know, Toma said, because I used it back home. It saved lives when our drills broke underground. The general looked at him silently for a moment. And you believe that method will work on a warship engine? Yes, sir. The principles are the same. Energy, rhythm, and balance, Arvin smiled slightly. You speak like a musician, not an engineer. Machines have music, sir, Toma replied. We just forget to listen. The general gave a short nod. Then prove it. The ship is yours for the next 12 hours. Do what you must. Darren looked surprised. Sir, this procedure could destabilize the entire drive if it fails. I know, Arvin said. But everything else has failed already. Let the recruit try. The crew cleared space around the main engine. Toma stood in front of the giant machine, its silent chambers stretching above him like a mountain of steel. He placed his hand against the surface and felt the faint tremor of power still trapped inside. It reminded him of the old mining rigs back home, buried deep under layers of stone waiting for a spark to wake them. He began by rerouting the secondary energy lines into harmonic modules. Then he placed small resonance sensors across the outer frame. The sensors would pick up every vibration during ignition. It was a slow, careful process that took hours. Sweat ran down his neck, but his hands never trembled. He was in his element. As he worked, other crew members whispered among themselves. Some admired his focus, while others doubted him. No recruit had ever been given so much control over a flagship system. But the general stood silently at the back, arms crossed, watching without interruption. When Toma finally finished, the floor was covered with open panels and glowing cables. The sensors blinked softly, waiting for input. He turned to Duran. "It's ready." Duran exhaled. "We're trusting you, Toma. If this fails, the core will collapse." "It won't," Toma said quietly. "It just needs to find its rhythm again." The general gave the order. "Begin the sequence." The engine room dimmed as the power redirected to the core. The monitor showed energy lines charging one by one. The first hum began, a low, uneven sound like distant thunder. The vibration spread through the deck plates, making the floor tremble under their feet. Toma closed his eyes and listened. The pitch was wrong. He adjusted the resonance valve slightly. The hum deepened, smoothing out. He made another small adjustment and the sound grew steadier. The vibration now matched the readings on the screen. Slowly, the numbers began to rise. "Flow is stabilizing," Darren said in disbelief. "Frequency at 98% match." Toma opened his eyes and smiled faintly. Almost there. He turned the final valve. A bright light surged through the plasma lines. The hum changed again, no longer weak and scattered, but strong and full like the steady heartbeat of a living thing. The entire ship seemed to sigh in relief as power flooded back into the main systems. The monitor flashed green. "Core ignition successful," the computer voice announced. Cheers erupted across the room. Engineers clapped each other on the back, relief washing over them. Darren looked stunned. He did it. He actually did it. Toma stepped back, his face calm but his eyes bright. The engine now glowed with pure energy, its rhythm perfect. It was alive again. The general walked up to him, his boots echoing on the metal floor. "You did more than I expected, recruit." Toma bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, sir." Arvin studied him carefully. "What you did today saved this ship. But tell me, where did you learn such things?" "In the mines, sir," Toma replied. "When machines broke underground, no one came to help. We had to fix them ourselves. Sometimes we worked by sound alone, without light or tools. We learned to listen to the metal." The general nodded slowly. "That kind of experience can't be taught in academies." The crew began resetting the systems as the ship's lights brightened. The vibrations under their feet felt steady, full of life. Toma cleaned his tools, his hands blackened by grease. When he stood up, he saw the general still watching him. "You've earned the respect of this crew," Arvin said, "and maybe a little of mine." "I only did what had to be done," Toma said quietly. "That's what makes it impressive," the general replied. As the day went on, the Valor began running full diagnostics. Systems came online one by one: navigation, communication, shields. The ship was alive again, stronger than before. Toma stayed behind after the others left, sitting near the engine he had helped awaken. He felt the gentle thrum beneath his palms like the pulse of something living. He didn't think about praise or reward. For him, it was enough to know that he had listened when no one else had. The ship had spoken and he had answered. That connection, simple yet powerful, filled him with quiet pride. Later, as the lights dimmed to night mode, General Arvin stood on the bridge looking out into space. The stars stretched endlessly before him. Behind him, his officers spoke softly about reports and numbers, but his mind stayed on the young recruit who had done the impossible. There was something different about that man, something beyond skill. It was as if he carried an understanding that others had forgotten, a respect for things that still had a soul, even when made of steel. The general smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "Maybe the heart of a fleet is not its weapons or power. Maybe it's people like him?" The Valor was alive again. For the first time in days, the sound of the main drive filled the corridors. It was not loud, but steady and deep, like the slow heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Lights glowed bright across the decks, systems responded smoothly, and the crew walked with a new sense of pride. The ship that had been drifting helplessly in space was once again moving forward. But the celebration did not last long. The head engineer Darren called a meeting early the next morning. The general and several officers gathered in the main control room. Toma stood quietly near the back, his hands folded behind his back. Darren began to speak in his steady professional tone. The good news is the ship is running again. However, the damage from the meteor storm was deeper than we thought. The plasma regulators are still unstable. They could fail again if the ship enters high-speed travel. We need a full rebuild of the main drive chamber. The general frowned. How long will that take? 3 days minimum, Duran replied. And that is if we have all parts ready. Arvin turned his gaze toward Toma. And what do you think, recruit? You brought this ship back to life once. Can you keep it alive again? Toma stepped forward. Yes, sir. But a rebuild is not just about replacing parts. We need to redesign the core so it can handle the pressure waves better. The general raised an eyebrow. Redesign? You want to change the heart of a fleet flagship? Toma nodded slowly. If we only replace what is broken, it will break again. The old design focuses on power. It should focus on balance. The general looked at Darren. Can it be done? It can, Darren admitted. But it is risky. If the balance fails, we lose the core. Arvin crossed his arms. We already lost time and almost lost the ship. Risk is nothing new. Do it. The crew began preparations immediately. The engine deck became a storm of activity. Crates of parts arrived from storage. Welding tools hissed, sparks flashed, and the air filled with the sound of machinery. Toma worked at the center of it all, guiding teams with calm precision. He drew new patterns on his data pad, simple lines that showed how the plasma flow could move in harmony through the conduits instead of crashing against them. Some of the senior engineers still doubted him, but Duran had grown to respect his calm confidence. He often watched the young recruit and shook his head with quiet admiration. He works like someone twice his age, he said once to another officer. He feels the machine instead of reading it. As hours passed, the engine's main chamber was stripped down to its metallic bones. Layers of panels, cables, and circuits were removed. The great heart of the ship lay open, glowing faintly in the dim light. Toma crawled through narrow passages, checking each section with a small scanner. He replaced cracked seals, tightened unstable bolts, and marked every weak point. The general visited several times during the process. Each time he found Toma at work, covered in grease but focused as ever. One time Arvin asked, "Do you ever rest, recruit?" Toma smiled faintly. "Machines do not rest until their work is done, sir." The general gave a short laugh. "And you seem to be one of them." By the second night, the ship's engine room looked like a construction site. But even in that chaos, there was rhythm. Teams moved in order, guided by Toma's calm voice. His method was different from others. He did not shout or command. He explained, he taught. Soon, even the most experienced engineers began following his instructions without question. At one point, while adjusting the energy valves, a young crewman named Rin accidentally triggered a power surge. The spark flashed and everyone froze. The voltage spike threatened to overload the entire line. Without hesitation, Toma grabbed the manual override handle and shut it down by hand. The force threw him back, but the system stabilized. Rin ran to him, his face pale. "I am sorry, sir. I did not mean to." Toma got up slowly, brushing dust from his sleeve. "You are learning. Machines forgive mistakes when you fix them fast." The crew laughed softly and tension melted away. The incident became a small reminder of how calm he remained even under pressure. When the rebuild neared completion, Toma asked for one special change. He wanted to install a secondary feedback coil near the plasma regulator. The idea was unusual. The coil would act as a stabilizer, absorbing extra energy and releasing it smoothly. Duran studied the plan. "This design is not in fleet blueprints." "I know," Toma said, "but it works on mining rigs. It stops the energy from shaking the core apart." The head engineer hesitated. "The fleet may not like us changing the design." "The fleet will like the ship surviving," Toma replied simply. The general approved the modification without hesitation. "Do it. Results speak louder than blueprints." The crew followed Toma's plan carefully. The stabilizer coil was built using spare drone circuits and magnetized tubing. It took several hours to align it perfectly with the main chamber. Toma adjusted every angle by hand, using his own sense of balance rather than the automated calibrators. When it was finally done, the system looked strange but solid. As the final bolts were locked in, Toma stepped back to inspect the engine. It looked cleaner, stronger, and more stable. Every line glowed evenly and the hum that filled the room was steady. Yet there was still one step left, the ignition test. The general arrived for the test. He stood on the observation platform above the engine room. "All right, gentlemen. Let us see if this miracle worker can rebuild a ship twice." The crew prepared the ignition sequence. Darren looked at Toma. "Are you ready?" Toma nodded. "Yes, sir. Let us bring it to life." He placed his hand on the control panel and activated the power transfer. The lights dimmed as energy surged into the main chamber. The plasma lines began to glow brighter. The ship vibrated slightly and the hum deepened, but then the monitor flashed a warning. "Pressure rising too fast," an officer said. "Regulator 2 is unstable." Toma leaned forward. "Switch flow to the new coil. It will absorb the pressure." Darren hesitated but obeyed. "Rerouting now." The vibration grew louder, then steadied. The warning light disappeared. A moment later, a deep sound rolled through the ship, powerful and smooth. The entire deck seemed to pulse with energy. The monitor displayed all systems green. "Ignition successful," the computer confirmed. Cheers erupted again. The engineers clapped and shouted. Even the general smiled broadly. "Well done," he said loudly. "I might have to keep that promise after all." The crew laughed, but Toma only smiled politely. "The ship will hold now, sir. The new design spreads the energy evenly. It should last longer than before." Arvin looked impressed. "You rebuilt one of the most advanced engines in the galaxy using old mining tricks. How does that even make sense?" Toma replied softly. "Machines do not care about who builds them. They care about how they are treated." The general nodded slowly. "You may have just rewritten a few fleet manuals." After the ignition, the Valor began moving again through space. The stars outside the window shifted slowly as the engines pushed the ship forward. Navigation systems came online, and the crew felt a wave of relief. They were no longer stranded. But success brought new attention. Reports of the repair reached nearby fleet ships. Messages poured in, asking how a recruit had managed to fix what entire engineering teams could not. Darren laughed as he read some of them. "They are calling you the miracle mechanic, Toma." Toma looked embarrassed. "I am just a worker, sir." "You are more than that," Darren said. "You have a gift." Later that night, when the engine room grew quiet, Toma stayed behind again. He sat near the glowing drive, listening to its low song. It was steady now, calm and strong. He felt a strange connection to it, as if the ship itself trusted him. The lights reflected softly off his face as he closed his eyes for a moment. The general entered quietly. "You are still here," he said. Toma stood and saluted. "I was checking the stability, sir." Arvin smiled slightly. "You were listening to it again, weren't you?" Toma hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir. It sounds better now." The general walked closer and stood beside him. "You know, I used to think ships were just tools, metal and power. But watching you, I realize they are more than that. They respond to care and respect." Toma looked at him with a calm expression. "Every machine has a purpose, sir. It just needs someone to understand it." The general studied him for a long moment. "You have changed how I see my own ship, recruit." "Thank you, sir," Toma said. Arvin looked toward the engine. "When I made that joke about marrying whoever fixed the engine, I did not expect to meet someone like you. I thought it was impossible." Toma smiled faintly. "Sometimes impossible things just need someone who believes they can be done." The general nodded slowly, a look of quiet respect in his eyes. "Rest, Toma, you have done enough for today. The Valor is alive again because of you." As the general left, Toma stayed a little longer. The soft glow of the engine filled the room with gentle light. Outside the windows, the stars moved slowly past, endless and bright. The Valor was once again part of that great ocean of space, its heart strong and steady. And somewhere deep within its metal walls, a single man had reminded everyone what it meant to be human, to listen, to learn, and to never give up. The great ship Valor moved through space once again, its engines humming with life and strength. Every corner of the vessel now glowed with renewed energy. The crew could feel the rhythm of the engine under their boots like the steady heartbeat of a giant. After days of darkness and tension, the lights and sounds of the ship filled everyone with hope and relief. Inside the control bay, the engineers were checking readings, logging results, and discussing what had happened. Every scan showed that the engine was not just repaired but performing better than it ever had before. The energy output was 20% higher. The vibration balance was perfect. Even the fuel efficiency had improved. It seemed as if the machine had been reborn, and at the center of it all stood Toma, the young recruit who had done the impossible. He stood quietly near the control panels, his uniform stained with oil, his hands still showing marks of hard work. The others spoke in excitement, but he remained calm. For him, it was not about praise or fame. It was about solving a problem that everyone thought could not be solved. The general entered the bay. His boots echoed against the floor. Everyone turned and straightened up. He looked around slowly, his sharp eyes moving across the room before stopping on Toma. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the engine filled the silence. Then the general walked closer to the young man. "I was told you rebuilt my engine," the general said, his voice strong but calm. "Yes, sir," Toma replied simply. He did not look nervous or proud. He just stood straight and answered. The general studied him. "I saw what you did on the monitor. You changed the entire configuration. You even used drone circuits. How did you know it would work?" Toma looked at the main control screen. "It was not a guess, sir. The plasma lines were blocked by resonance feedback. The regulator was sending false readings. I used drone parts to create a balance node. The old mining engines on my home planet used a similar system. It worked then, so I tried it here." The general nodded slowly. "You say it like it was simple." "It is only simple when you understand it, sir," Toma said softly. The words carried quiet confidence, and the engineers nearby exchanged glances. They had spent days trying to fix the problem, using every method they knew. Yet this new recruit had solved it in a few hours, using logic and skill. The general looked at him again and said, "You did not just repair a ship. You saved the fleet. Without this engine, we would have drifted for weeks." Toma looked down for a moment. "I only did my duty, sir." The general gave a small smile, one that few had ever seen before. "Duty or not, you have earned respect. And about my earlier words," he paused, letting the room fall silent again. "I said I would marry anyone who could fix that engine. I was wrong to say it like a challenge. You have proven more than anyone's pride. You have shown what true talent looks like." The crew chuckled quietly, and even Toma smiled a little. The general continued, "From this day forward, you are no longer a simple recruit. You will serve as senior technician of the fleet. Report to engineering command tomorrow morning." Gasps filled the room. Promotions in the fleet were rare, and such a jump in rank was almost unheard of. But everyone agreed that if anyone deserved it, it was Toma. He stood still, taking in the moment. "Thank you, sir. I will do my best." The general gave him a respectful nod and left the room. The engineers surrounded Toma, clapping him on the back and shaking his hand. They spoke excitedly, asking him how he had done it, what calculations he had used, and what he planned next. For the first time, he smiled fully and joined their laughter. Later that night, Toma stood alone in the engine chamber. The lights were dim and the main core pulsed with a steady glow. He looked at the great machine he had brought back to life. He thought of his home, the mining colony where he grew up fixing old equipment with scraps. Back then, no one had cared about his skills. He was just another worker. But here, in the middle of space, his knowledge had saved lives. He placed his hand on the smooth metal surface. The machine hummed softly beneath his fingers, like a living creature breathing again. "We did it," he whispered quietly. The next morning, the story spread through the entire fleet. People in other ships sent messages of congratulations. Some called him the engineer of valor. Others called him the miracle mechanic. Every name carried respect and admiration. Even officers who had never met him wanted to learn his methods. When Toma arrived at the engineering command room for his new duty, everyone stood and saluted him. It was not because of his new title, but because of what he represented. He was proof that skill and courage could come from anywhere. He had not won with rank or power, but with knowledge and determination. Throughout the day, he worked with the senior engineers, helping them record the new engine configuration. He explained the resonance theory in simple terms so that everyone could understand it. He also showed them how to adapt old ideas to new systems. The engineers listened carefully, taking notes, realizing that true mastery came from creative thinking, not just manuals and machines. During lunch, one of the older engineers, a kind man named Rel, sat beside him. "You know, Toma," Rel said, "I have worked on ships for 20 years. I have seen great minds and great failures, but what you did was something else. You didn't just fix an engine. You changed how we see our work." Toma looked surprised. "I only followed logic. There was nothing special." Rel shook his head. "That's where you are wrong. The special thing is that you never gave up when everyone else did. That is what makes a true engineer." Toma smiled. He did not reply, but the words stayed in his heart. That evening, the general called for a meeting on the bridge. Every officer and department head was present. The stars shone through the wide windows, and the light of nearby planets filled the air with color. The general stood at the center. "We have faced disaster," he said, his voice echoing across the bridge. "But we overcame it. Not through luck, not through strength, but through human will and mind. We stand here today because one man refused to accept failure. He fixed what we thought was beyond repair. And in doing so, he reminded us of what humanity truly stands for." He turned toward Toma. "Senior Technician Toma, step forward." Toma walked to the front. The crew clapped as the general handed him a silver insignia, a mark of honor given only to those who performed acts of extraordinary service. The general spoke again. "This insignia is more than a symbol. It is a reminder that greatness does not come from orders. It comes from action. Let every person aboard remember this day as the day human skill proved itself once more." The applause was long and heartfelt. Toma looked at the insignia in his hand and felt both pride and humility. He did not see himself as a hero. He saw himself as a worker who had done his part to keep the ship alive. After the ceremony, he returned to the engine room once more. The hum of the machine filled the air, steady and strong. He stood there for a long time, watching the light flow through the energy lines. The ship was alive, and so was the spirit of every person aboard. He realized then that respect was not something to be demanded or chased. It was something that came naturally when one gave their best with honesty and effort. The general had given him recognition, but it was the quiet power of knowledge and perseverance that had truly lifted him up. The Valor continued its journey through space, stronger than before. Whenever the crew passed through the engineering bay, they saw Toma working calmly, teaching others, improving systems, and preparing for the future. And whenever the engine roared to life, it carried with it the story of one human who refused to give up. The legend of Toma spread beyond the fleet. Other colonies and stations heard about him. Young recruits began studying his repair methods. Engineers on distant worlds talked about his ideas in classrooms. His name became a symbol of hope and intelligence in the far reaches of space. And deep within himself, Toma stayed the same simple man who once repaired old mining drills on a forgotten planet. He knew that the stars were vast and challenges endless, but as long as humans believed in themselves, they would always find a way to rebuild, rise, and move forward. The ship Valor was now back on course, sailing through the deep stars like a proud giant. Its engines glowed steady blue, smoother than ever. The hum of power filled the corridors, a soft sound that every crew member had grown to love. The ship that once drifted in silence now sang again, carrying life and purpose through the endless dark. Toma had become a familiar face everywhere. Wherever he walked, people greeted him with smiles and nods. The new title of senior technician suited him well, yet he carried it without pride. He still wore the same simple uniform, still fixed small machines in his spare time, and still worked alongside the others instead of above them. Every morning he went to the engine chamber to check readings. It was his favorite place. The great machine pulsed with energy like the heart of a living being. He often stood there for a few moments just listening. The engine spoke in rhythm and sound, and to Toma, it was like listening to a friend breathe. The general often visited him too. Though once he had mocked him, now his visits carried respect. He had come to admire the young man who had saved the ship and his command. One afternoon, the general walked into the engine bay while Toma was adjusting the plasma regulator. "You still work as if the ship depends on you alone," the general said with a small smile. Toma looked up and smiled back. "Every ship depends on someone, sir. I only make sure it runs right." The general crossed his arms and studied him. You remind me of the old captains from the first space expeditions. They built their ships with their own hands. They never trusted machines until they heard them breathe. You are like them, Toma laughed softly. Maybe they were just careful, sir. I am the same, the general nodded. Careful and wise. You know your work changed how the entire fleet sees things. I received reports from other ships. They are studying your rebuild. They even sent requests for your method. You are becoming a teacher of the fleet. Toma felt shy hearing that. That is good, sir. If they can learn from it, then it was worth it. The general watched him for a moment, then said quietly, Do you remember what I said the day you fixed the engine? Toma looked surprised. Yes, sir. You said you would marry whoever fixed it. The general laughed. Yes, and you actually did fix it. I said it as a joke, but you made it real. You gave the ship a new life. Toma smiled politely. Then I suppose the ship is your true partner, sir. You love it more than anyone else. The general laughed again. You might be right. But still, a promise made must be remembered. I owe you more than a joke or a title. I owe you my respect and my trust. You have both. Toma saluted him, his face calm and serious. That means more to me than any marriage, sir. The general returned the salute, and for a moment both men stood as equals, united not by rank but by honor. As the days passed, life aboard Valor became peaceful again. The fleet continued its mission across the stars, charting new routes and exploring unknown worlds. Every time the ship entered a dangerous sector, the crew felt confident because they knew their ship was stronger than ever. One evening, the fleet detected a signal from a nearby planet. It was weak but steady. The general ordered a landing team to investigate. Toma volunteered to join them. The general hesitated at first but then agreed. If anyone can handle strange machines, it's you, he said. The planet was covered in silver dust and quiet winds. The landing team found an ancient ruin half buried under sand. Inside, they discovered what looked like an old alien reactor, silent for centuries. The crew could not understand its design. The controls were unlike anything they had seen before. Toma studied the machine carefully. He ran his hands over the markings, following the lines and patterns. After a while, he began to see the logic behind the structure. It was a form of energy circulation similar to human designs, but based on magnetic balance instead of plasma flow. He explained it to the others in simple terms. This is not dead. It only sleeps. It can wake again if we adjust the field here. The general, who had come down to observe, nodded. Can you wake it safely? I can try, Toma replied. For hours, Toma worked on the alien reactor. The wind outside howled, carrying silver dust through the air. The light of the twin suns faded into dusk. Inside the ruins, the team waited, watching the young man who once repaired a human engine now working on alien technology with the same calm hands. Finally, the reactor began to glow faintly. The hum grew deeper, stronger until the walls of the ruin vibrated. Lights flared across the old consoles and ancient symbols lit up one by one. The energy readings shot up. It is alive, one of the engineers said in awe. Toma smiled slightly. Alive again. Like Valor. The general placed a hand on his shoulder. You have done it again. Wherever you go, machines rise under your touch. You have a gift. Toma looked at the glowing reactor. It is not a gift, sir. It is understanding. Machines are like people. They need care, patience, and the will to see how they truly work. If you listen, they tell you what they need. The general nodded slowly. And you listen better than anyone I know. The reactor powered up a beacon that began transmitting signals into space. The fleet received the message, and data from it revealed maps of uncharted star systems. It was a great discovery for humanity. Because of Toma's understanding, they now had routes to new worlds and resources. When the team returned to Valor, the crew cheered. The general called another meeting in the Grand Hall. Officers, technicians, and soldiers gathered together. He stood before them and spoke. We began this mission as explorers. Along the way, we lost our power, our hope, and our direction. But one of our own reminded us who we are. Toma not only repaired this ship, but he also helped us rediscover the meaning of human strength. Today, because of him, we have opened doors to new stars. Let every person here remember that greatness begins with one act of will. The hall echoed with applause. The crew's pride filled the air. Toma stood quietly in the crowd, not seeking attention. He only smiled, glad that the ship and crew were safe. After the ceremony, the general walked up to him once again. You know, Toma, I keep thinking about that day. When I said those foolish words about marriage, I never thought they would lead to this. You rebuilt more than an engine. You rebuilt belief, Toma smiled. Then that is a better promise, sir. To keep belief alive, the general nodded. Agreed. That is the promise we both keep. Months passed, and Valor continued to explore deeper into the unknown. Every planet they reached brought new challenges, but Toma was always there, finding solutions, teaching others, and inspiring everyone around him. His calm manner and simple wisdom made him respected not just as a technician, but as a leader in his own quiet way. He started training younger recruits, teaching them not just how to repair machines, but how to think about them. A broken system is never useless, he would say. It only needs someone to understand why it broke. Once you know that, you can make it better than before. His students listened carefully, learning more than lessons. They learned patience and faith in their work. Soon there were many who followed his methods, spreading his way of thinking across the fleet. One day, when the ship rested near a new colony world, the general invited Toma to the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly before them, and the lights of distant worlds shimmered like dust in the dark. You have come far, Toma, the general said. You began as a recruit, and now your name is known across the colonies. What will you do next? Toma looked out at the stars. There will always be something broken out there, sir. Ships, machines, maybe even hope. I want to keep fixing things. That is enough for me, the general smiled. Then the fleet will always need you. Toma looked thoughtful. Not me, sir. They will need the idea that humans can fix anything if they do not give up. That is what matters. The general placed a hand on his shoulder. You are right, Toma. That is what makes us human. The ship continued to drift among the stars, shining bright and strong. Every hum of its engine carried the story of one man who rebuilt what others thought lost. The promise once spoken in jest became something far greater, a symbol of determination, respect, and belief in human potential. From that day forward, whenever a young recruit joined the fleet, they heard the story of Toma and the Valor. It was told not as a tale of machines, but as a story of courage and understanding. And somewhere deep in the engine bay, Toma still worked with the same calm smile, listening to the sound of the machine that once stood silent, knowing that as long as humans believed, no engine, no dream, and no hope would ever truly die.